Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 28th of November 2023. Let's go to where we normally start, the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day. Before all the usual caveats apply, you can find them in the description to the video below. And as expected, very low numbers in most of the categories due to the very poor weather. We've had some blizzards, we've had some record-breaking storms in the Black Sea, 9-meter waves, the likes of which have never been seen, I don't think, in recorded history. So some really challenging conditions, and that's going to stop things like drones. And if you're stopping drones, you're probably stopping artillery, maneuvers, drones themselves, dropping IEDs and first-person view loitering munitions being active. It has not been conducive to much activity. However, still a surprisingly high number of personnel lost for the Russians. And I don't know what that tells you, whether there are strikes behind the lines that take place. We don't hear an awful lot, and actually you can say this both ways. There are probably hits that are taking place in Russia and behind the lines in the occupied territories that are happening on a daily basis that we're just not hearing about. You occasionally hear about, an explosion in Tokmak or an explosion in Donetsk, as we'll find out. But I'm fairly sure that there are other hits that are just taking place that don't find their way to social media. And so you just don't know whether there are troop accumulations that get hit that we're unsure of. Anyway, 860 is still a significant loss to the Russians. 3 tanks, 3 EPVs, 1 artillery system, 3 vehicles and fuel tanks. Those are pretty much record low numbers, I guess, as far as, if you add up all the equipment, you've got, 10 pieces of equipment. That's insanely low. But completely understandable. When we go to Andrew Perpetua's counting up across the socials of equipment loss, we've got back to a very heavy loss for the Russians in terms of the ratio of Russian losses to Ukrainian losses, about a 4 or 5 to 1, exactly where the Ukrainians would want it. Surveillance and comms piece, artillery, including a TOS 1, another TOS 1. They're certainly losing those thermobaric pieces, aren't they? Tolpan, so that's the Tulip, that's a 240 millimeter mortar, self-propelled mortar, as far as I can remember. That's a really heavy piece of equipment. It's a big loss. A T-90M thrown into the tanks there. You've got a range of tanks lost by the Russians. Another T-90M. I wonder what they must have lost over. Must be approaching 60% of their entire fleet of T-90Ms. Those are their breakthrough tanks, the T-90 breakthrough. They are the best tank they have, supposedly, and I think they only had 100 T-90M variants at the beginning of the war, and at one stage we had, this is going back months, we had 40 confirmed losses. So they'd lost 40% of their fleet. Well, that was months ago, and actually they've lost a whole bunch recently, and it must be approached somewhere between 50 and 60%. I should go and check that out. I'm sure one of you will know. Infantry fighting vehicles, a range of them, trucks and civilian vehicles, so logistics being hit. For the Ukrainians, you've got an unknown self-propelled gun, a Crab, HS Crab, so those are the ones provided by Poland. They actually received quite a few of those, but they are decent bits of kit, and it's going to be a bit of a sore loss. But other than that, not too much to worry hugely about in terms of Ukrainian losses. So a bad day for the Russians as far as what's coming through on the visuals. There was... I don't know, I can't remember. It was one of the sources I have seen or heard in the last 24 hours, probably last night, talking about how they only get a certain amount of footage. Let's go and find that. That was it. It's in a reporting from Ukraine video where they mentioned Magyar, the chap that's in charge of the very famous drone group, that they showed a video of a truck exploding and fundamentally detonating, big old explosion due to ammunition cooking off. And they said we've got loads of footage of trucks getting blown up, but we don't upload them because they're boring. They're literally saying, so this goes back to the idea of like, do we have a one-to-one representation of the losses? I mean, that's a bad example as far as the day's concerned because of the weather. But in general, when you're seeing sort of 30, 30, 30 or whatever, and then on here you're seeing, I don't know, 15, 10, 15 or something like, I don't know. You get the point. It's like, should we expect to see everything? Well, when Magyar's saying, well, we don't upload most of our truck things that, you know, the trucks that get blown up because, you know, and it's true, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. If they're destroying 15 in a day, there's only point in uploading one or two, unless your job is to prove to the general public that you are blowing up exactly what you claim you're blowing up. But, you know, they don't need to waste their time doing that and uploading all of those things to social media. That takes time. They need to be out flying and whatnot. So they'll upload one or two that are representative of the work they've done, but the rest they'll be submitting to the general staff, and then the general staff compile their figures. So I think that was a really interesting admission from Magyar. Right, here we have a Russian army volunteer. He came to a Russian church to ask for donations. While speaking, he accidentally voiced out the horrible number of losses and the miserable state of the still alive Russian soldiers in Donetsk. So what does he say? He says, right now in Donetsk region, there's one regiment that's constantly moving forward. In fact, right now there are heavy losses. I was absent there for 10 days. And during this time, they had over 1,000 men killed. So that's in that one regiment, 1,000 men killed in 10 days. So we are not competing with the Ministry of Defence. We simply add to whatever it doesn't have time to deliver. So that's why he's going to church to ask for stuff. It's like, you know, we want to add to what we're being given. He says they're handing out gloves instead of medals. You know, that's how desperate they are for basic equipment. But yeah, so things are desperate for his regiment, as he claims there. This is a loss for the Ukrainians, which is quite significant. So Ukrainian 5157 deployable diesel electric generator, likely for an S300 PS system, was being towed by a Kraz 260, was completely destroyed by a Russian Lancet. The truck was damaged. The Lancet activity has immensely increased. This is true. There is, and you know, that's what's left of it. It was fundamentally blown apart, that generator. That could well be part of a S300 battery, probably the least problematic part of it to be blown up, but still significant. And it is this idea that Lancers are back with a vengeance at the moment. Right, exiled mayor said Ukrainian resistance blows up a car with pro-Russian Chechen fighters. So the resistance working in Melitopol or near Melitopol has destroyed a car with Chechen fighters in. That ship that I reported yesterday, the Raptor class patrol boat, and I then gave a correction saying, well, that picture is from a cargo vessel. One of the rumors, or one of the explanations why that rumor got out is potentially, although someone later denied that this was a connection, but there was a cargo ship literally called Raptor, like its name was Raptor, that sunk in the Mediterranean at the same time as, you know, the storm in the Black Sea. So that could be why there was a rumor about a Raptor sinking, breaking up. I don't know. Perhaps joining the dots there makes sense of the data. Right. Okay. We finally have like official confirmation that those 5 aircraft, so it was what was it, a Su-34, Su-35, 2 Mi-8 MTPR-1s and a Mi-8, plus a Su-35 over the Black Sea, which is actually six pieces of kit. These Mi-8 TPR-1s are the electronic warfare helicopters, a little bit rarer. Anyway, if you remember in Bryansk, north of the Ukrainian northern border, there was that time, I think 4 months ago was it, After 4 months, we now have official confirmation by Yuri Ignat, the spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, that the German-delivered Patriot battery was indeed used to shoot down the 2 fighter jets and 3 helicopters in the Bryansk region in May this year. It was a brilliant operation led by the Air Force commander. Thanks to their unconventional and decisive actions, Patriot SAM units destroyed 5 aircraft in 5 minutes in the Bryansk direction from where they were then bombarding our northern regions with guided missiles. It just goes to show that if you do stuff like that, move Patriots into a place, maybe just quickly. I know it's a bit of an effort to move those whole batteries, but man, you can get a great return on investment. That was an insane day, one of the worst days for modern Russian aircraft, aside from the airfields, the air bases getting hit with the helicopters recently. That was an absolute shocker of a day, and it was indeed. There were so many theories going on at the time. Actually, the most prevailing theory was that it was Russia's own air defense systems that went a bit nuts and shot down their own stuff. Well, actually, no, Patriot air defense system was responsible. Okay. There's, as Tim White says, so many railway arson attacks going on in Russia at the moment this year, but the first one's just been recorded in Dagestan. So a relay box has been burned out. Not particularly huge, but those kind of activities will certainly help the Ukrainians, especially if they're widespread. And talking about widespread, here's a fire set by partisans to a military warehouse in Yakutsk. Really significant fire there. That's a big one. Okay, moving on to distance strikes. And as you can imagine, there won't have been too much activity due to the weather, but there was some. According to Russian media, a drone attack on the Smolensk aircraft plants, and this was a couple of nights ago, was successful, and 2 MiG-31s were completely damaged. So that is a successful hit by what one would presume would be drones into the Smolensk air factory there with two MiG-31s. Kryvyi Rih has confirmed it's had a rocket hit last night, but not sure what's happened with that. I think it might have been a successful rocket hit from the Russians into Kryvyi Rih. Explosions were heard in Skadovsk, so this is near, it's in the south of Kherson near Crimea, and it does get routinely hit as a fairly big explosion, or at least one that's been widely reported over the last, it was last night, that was. So, or was that 2 nights? No, that was yesterday afternoon. So that was over the last 24 hours that has happened, but that's been variously reported. Donetsk has been hit. Oh, this is a big explosion. Residents saw and reported a loud bang in the sky over the city, but I don't know whether there was any. I think that looks like it's in the clouds, so I don't know what happened on the ground, whether anything fell down or whether successful hits on Donetsk itself. And then in Ryazan, in Russia, explosions have been heard. Traditional air defense work, no injuries. That's what has been uttered by the Russians, but don't know if that's true. And actually, there's talk about Ryazan because it is a... Ryazan, it's reported that drones were shot down in the area of Ryazan oil refinery, which produces gasoline, diesel, and fuel oil. We've been talking about that, as Trent Telenko says. Ukrainian drone strategic bombing is now going after Russian oil. Actually, I think it's been doing that for some time, to be perfectly honest. But it is about 500 kilometers from Ukraine, southeastern Moscow. So this is a sizable distance from Ukraine. The Ukraine have shown themselves repeatedly to be able to hit targets well around the 700 kilometer plus mark, possibly even further, but it does depend whether these drones are released within Russia or within Ukraine, but still 700 kilometers plus from the Ukrainian border. Another explosion in occupied Tokmak, that's in the south, south of the Robotyne sector. That's happened this morning. That's a big one, or early this morning. A very big one, actually, as reported by locals. And then in the Russian-occupied Horlivka. So that's where, between Avdiivka and Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians have had some opportunistic success recently. Something's burning there, so there's been an explosion. I don't know if it's anything to do with that attack or that sector. Right, let's move on to other bits and pieces. This is an interesting kind of admission, I guess. It comes from Romanov, pro-Russian source, but I don't know if it's actually him or him quoting others. But Russian tankies suddenly realizing that they've again been screwed over by Putin. Apparently, they're not happy about discussions of peace talks without you finishing Ukraine off. The minimum requirements are full control of 4 regions, direct corridor to Transnistria. Otherwise, there's no point in starting. Just have a little dip into this. We won't look into what they say about the Ukrainians, the usual kind of stuff there. But at the same time, in the constitution of our motherland, new regions are prescribed precisely within the administrative boundaries, and the enemy is on their territory. In fact, they are occupied. Stopping the hostilities without control over the Odessa region will immediately be followed by another crisis in Transnistria. And without a direct corridor there, we will not be able to help our peacekeepers there. And there are also huge warehouses with ammunition for weapons from the times of the Union. This is so relevant now for the Ukrainian armed forces. I will now leave aside the moral and ethical questions about why, in the event of an agreement, our soldiers give their lives, and how many times statements have already been made in the style of "we were deceived." I mean, this is a really big admission. Any freezing of the conflict without achieving minimal results in the form of full control over the areas prescribed in the Constitution, direct corridor to Transnistria. So that means going through Kherson, over the Dnipro, taking Mykolaiv, taking Odessa, and getting to Transnistria, getting to sort of Romanian border there. That is a minimum requirement. It's just a time bomb that will take even more lives in the future, and even possibly the lives of future generations. Once we have started, we need to go to victory. Otherwise, there's no point in starting. This is that kind of sunk cost fallacy from some Russian thinkers that, and you can understand it. Well, we wasted all these lives. You've got to make them mean something. So, we'll carry on. But of course, that is fallacious thinking, and it's often better to get out while you can. It's just... there is still this appetite to, make this all matter for the Russians to succeed, and succeeding means at least taking land that they didn't even get to at the height of their successes at the beginning of the war. So they never got to Mykolaiv, they never got to Odessa. Right, but yet they're like, well, we can't leave without those things. So just an interesting insight there. Now, this is a big bit of news coming out. Mariana Budanova, the wife of Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kirilo Budanov, was poisoned. A representative of the military intelligence agency, HUR, not allowed to go public at this time, told the Kyiv Independent today, sorry. This is just fresh out. The Ukrainian media outlet Babel reported earlier today, citing undisclosed military intelligence sources, that Budanova was hospitalized due to heavy metal poisoning. The HUR representative confirmed Babel's report in a comment for the Kyiv Independent. She was reportedly hospitalized after a prolonged deterioration of her health. The course of treatment is now being completed, and then there will be a checkup by the doctors, Babel's source said. So, just seeing if these quote, this is from P*11, but quoting the same source. These substances are not used in any way in everyday life and military affairs. Their presence may indicate a purposeful attempt to poison a specific person, the intelligence agency said. So she's still in hospital. That is obviously really serious. Budanov's had many attempts on his life. And what was the count of Budanov? Or was it Zelensky? I'm sure the number 352 attempts on life. But anyway, you can imagine that they are foiling all sorts of attempts on a consistent basis to get rid of these key people in the Ukrainian government and defense forces. So the economy, this is the Ukrainian Economy Ministry, launches an accelerator for demining startups. So this is a program in cooperation with the Kyiv School of Economics for startup companies that focus on demining. It's really good news. Obviously, that's going to be a massive challenge going forward for decades. I mean, you look at places like, Vietnam and Cambodia, where mines are still being found. And that's how many years? Like almost 50 years after the what is 50 years after the Vietnam War. Well, this is the most heavily mined country in the world, in history, is it? And so, are they going to be finding this stuff in 50 years' time? Almost certainly. Putin approved the increase in military spending to record levels since the time of the USSR, according to the Moscow Times. In 2024, 10.775 trillion rubles will be spent on defense, which is 70% more than in 2023 and 2.3 times more than in 2022, 3 times higher than 2021. Okay, this is huge spending. Russia are getting onto a war footing with regard to their economy and the entire government. They've kind of done this somewhat quietly, but they're effectively there. If the West don't realise the threat that this poses for Ukraine, then it will come back and bite us on the backside. So I'm going to do a little bit of analysis in the next news piece, where I'm going to refer to a talk that a chap called Barron's has just said. And I'm going to dip into Justin Bronk's excellent interview on War Carroll's channel. That is an absolute must watch. To just give you, and I'm going to be a bit alarmist to say that, shit's getting real. And actually, if the West don't properly turn up, none of this half-baked stuff, like properly turn up, then we might really regret it for a long time to come. Anyway, that's something to look forward to, I guess. Take care. Speak to you soon. Tool Pips.